The tires screeched. He threw himself forward, tackling the small child just as the car flew past. As the terrified mother rushed over, he looked up and saw the face of the CEO who had unknowingly signed his termination papers 6 months ago. He had just saved her son's life, and in doing so, had stumbled back into the conspiracy that had cost him his career. To the indifferent, fast-moving city, he was just another man on the corner. Elias Thorne, at 38, had a face that was beginning to show the strain of a life knocked off its axis. He stood in a slightly too large suit he'd bought from a second-hand store, clutching a worn leather portfolio. He was on his way to another dead-end interview for a low-level data entry job, a humiliating fall for a man who, just 6 months ago, had been the lead data analyst for Etheria Analytics, one of the country's top tech corporations. They had called him a prodigy, a visionary. His ability to see the story in the numbers, to find the hidden patterns in the chaos of the market, was legendary. He had a beautiful corner office, a team that respected him, and a future that seemed limitless. Then, the breach happened. A catastrophic leak of sensitive client data. An internal investigation, swift and brutal, had pointed the finger directly at him. The evidence was digital, irrefutable, and completely fabricated. He was fired, disgraced, and quietly blacklisted from the industry he had once dominated. The crisis began in the space of a heartbeat. A small boy, no more than 6, with a bright red backpack, suddenly broke away from his mother's grip and darted into the busy street, chasing a bouncing ball. Elias's mind didn't have time to think. His body, honed by years of reacting to the split-second shifts of the market, moved on pure instinct. He dropped his portfolio and lunged, tackling the child in a clean, low motion, wrapping his body around the boys as they tumbled onto the asphalt. A Blacktown car, its horn blaring, screeched past the exact spot where the child had been, its tires smoking, missing them by inches. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then the boy, shocked but unharmed, began to cry. A woman's frantic screams cut through the air. "Leo! Oh my God, Leo!" Elias sat up, his own heart hammering against his ribs, his arms still protectively around the sobbing child. A woman in a sharp, elegant business suit was kneeling beside them, her face pale with terror. Her hands, shaking uncontrollably, hovered over her son, as if afraid to touch him, to confirm he was real. Is he okay?" she asked, her voice a raw, ragged whisper. "He's fine," Elias said, his own voice steady as he did a quick, practiced check of the boy's limbs. "Just scared. You're okay, son. You're safe." The woman finally looked at him, her eyes, a sharp, intelligent gray, filled with a gratitude so profound it was almost painful to see. "Thank you," she breathed. "Oh my God, thank you. You saved his life." And in that moment, as he looked into her face, Elias felt the ground drop out from under him. He knew that face. He had seen it on the cover of magazines, in the company's annual reports, in the official, impersonal email that had announced his termination. It was Catherine Reed, the newly appointed CEO of Etheria Analytics. The powerful, driven woman who, consumed by the recent death of her husband and the immense pressure of her new role, had signed off on the findings of the internal investigation that had destroyed his life. She, of course, did not recognize him. To her, he was just a stranger in a cheap suit who had just saved her son. She fumbled in her purse, her hands still shaking. "Please," she said, pulling out a slim, elegant business card. I don't know how to repay you. Anything you need. Please, call me." Elias took the card. The familiar, hated logo of Etheria Analytics was embossed in silver. He looked from the card to the woman who was a symbol of his ruin, and to the small, crying boy who was now the symbol of a strange, new, and terrifying connection between them. He had been running from Etheria, from the lies and the betrayal. And in one desperate, heroic act, he had just run straight back into the heart of it. For 2 days, Catherine Reed's business card sat on Elias's small, cluttered kitchen table, a gleaming, silver-embossed symbol of a world he had lost. His every instinct told him to burn it, to walk away, to continue his slow, humiliating descent into a life of quiet desperation. To contact the CEO of Etheria would be to reopen a wound he had tried so desperately to close. He had been framed, and the system she represented had been the instrument of his professional execution. But then he would think of the little boy, Leo, and the look of pure, primal terror in his mother's eyes. He had not just saved a child, he had saved her child. That created a strange, unwilling bond, a thread of connection he could not easily sever. He was also desperate. The interview he had been on his way to had been another failure, another polite, dismissive, "We'll let you know." The bills were piling up. His savings were nearly gone. The card was not just a reminder of his past. It was a potential lifeline, however terrifying. He finally made the call on a gray Thursday morning, his heart pounding a nervous rhythm against his ribs. He expected to be routed through a phalanx of assistants, but to his surprise, he was put through almost immediately. "This is Catherine Reed." Her voice came through the line, crisp and professional. "My name is Elias Thorne," he said, his own voice sounding unfamiliar to him. I'm the man from the street, the one who helped your son." The professionalism in her voice instantly melted, replaced by a wave of raw, genuine gratitude. "Mr. Thorne," she said, and he could hear the relief in her voice. "I am so glad you called. I haven't stopped thinking about what you did. Please, I insist on repaying you. Whatever you need, money, a new suit, anything, it's yours." "I don't want a reward, Ms. Reed," Elias said, surprising himself with his own firmness. "I want a conversation. I want to know why I was fired." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. You worked for Etheria?" she asked, her voice now filled with a new, cautious curiosity. "I was your lead data analyst until 6 months ago," he said. "I was fired for a data breach that I did not commit." Another silence, this one longer, heavier. "Meet me in 1 hour," she said finally. "My private conference room, 40th floor." The walk back into the gleaming, glass-and-steel tower of Etheria Analytics felt like a ghost returning to the scene of his own murder. The security guard at the front desk, who had once greeted him by name, now looked at him with a mixture of pity and suspicion. But Catherine Reed's name was a golden key, and it opened every door. She was waiting for him in a minimalist conference room with a breathtaking view of the city. She was no longer the terrified mother, but the powerful, formidable CEO. She gestured for him to sit, her gray eyes sharp and analytical. "I've reviewed your file," she began, without preamble. The internal investigation was conclusive. It showed the breach originated from your terminal, using your encrypted credentials. The evidence was absolute. "The evidence was fabricated," Elias countered, his voice quiet but unshakable. "The logs were altered. The timestamps were manipulated. It was a perfect, elegant frame job. So perfect, in fact, that it could only have been done by someone with the highest level of system access. Someone on the inside." Catherine listened, her fingers steepled, her expression unreadable. In her world, data was truth. To suggest the data itself was a lie was a form of heresy. "Who would do that?" she asked. "And why?" "To cover something up," Elias said. "The breach happened the day before I was scheduled to present my quarterly audit. An audit in which I had found a series of significant financial anomalies. Millions of dollars, routed through a series of shell corporations, disguised as payments to software vendors." He looked her directly in the eye. "Someone is stealing from your company, Ms. Reed, and they used me as a scapegoat to cover their tracks." He had expected her to be dismissive, to defend her team, her system. But instead, he saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Not belief, perhaps, but a seed of doubt. She was a woman who had recently inherited a kingdom after her husband's sudden death, and she was smart enough to know that she did not know everything about it. "The men who ran that investigation," she said slowly. "My COO, Marcus Sterling, and the head of security, Julian Vance. They were my late husband's most trusted lieutenants. They have been with the company for over a decade. And they are the only 2 people, other than you, with the level of unrestricted system access required to fabricate the evidence that was used against me," Elias finished quietly. A heavy, dangerous silence settled over the room. Catherine stood and walked to the massive window, looking out at the city below. She was at a crossroads. To trust the man who had saved her son would be to distrust the very men she had been relying on to run her company. It was an impossible choice. "I cannot simply reopen a closed investigation based on the word of a fired employee," she said, her back still to him. It would cause chaos. It would signal to the board that I don't trust my own executive team. I understand, Elias said, standing up, the familiar, bitter taste of defeat in his mouth. Thank you for your time, Ms. Reed. But, she said, turning from the window, a new, decisive light in her eyes. I can hire a new consultant. She walked to her desk. I have a series of, let's call them inconsequential data logs from our server archives. They need to be reviewed for redundancy. It's a low-level, temporary contract. The pay is terrible. She pushed a thin folder across the desk towards him. Are you interested, Mr. Thorne? Elias looked at the folder, then at her. He understood what she was doing. She was giving him a key, a small, secret back door into the very system that had been used to destroy him. It was a test. A dangerous, unofficial investigation, sanctioned by a CEO who could deny everything if he was caught. It was a chance to find the truth. Yes, Ms. Reed, he said, picking up the folder. I am very interested. Elias Thorne's return to Etheria Analytics was a quiet, almost invisible event. He was given a small, windowless office in the sub-basement, a forgotten room that was once a storage closet for old server equipment. His official title was Archival Data Consultant, a deliberately vague and inconsequential name designed to attract no attention. To the rest of the company, he was a ghost, a temporary contractor hired to do a boring, low-priority task. But to Elias, this small, forgotten room was his way back into the heart of the machine that had chewed him up and spat him out. The data logs Catherine Reed had given him were, on the surface, exactly as she had described, inconsequential. They were old server archives, years of mundane system performance data that no one ever looked at. But Elias knew that in a system as complex as Etheria's, nothing was truly inconsequential. Every data point, every timestamp, every server ping was part of a larger story. He wasn't just looking at the data, he was looking for the ghosts within it. For the first week, he worked with a meticulous, almost monastic patience. He did not touch the main company's servers. He only worked with the isolated archives Catherine had provided. He knew he was being watched. He could feel the eyes of the two men who had framed him, the COO, Marcus Sterling, and the head of security, Julian Vance, monitoring his every move. He saw them in the hallways, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and contempt. They saw him as a broken man, a former star brought back to do a menial task out of the CEO's misplaced pity. They had no idea he was, in fact, a hunter, and that he was slowly, methodically, tracking their digital footprints. The first breakthrough came not from the data, but from a human source. A young, nervous IT technician, a woman named Lena who had been on Elias's old team, saw him in the cafeteria. She approached him hesitantly, her eyes darting around as if she were afraid of being seen. Elias, she whispered, her voice low and urgent. What are you doing here? They said you. I'm just on a short-term contract, he said, his voice calm, reassuring. It's good to see you, Lena. Be careful, she said, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her coffee cup. After you left, things got weird. Sterling and Vance, they've locked down everything. They implemented a new security protocol, a data integrity system. But it's not about security. It's about control. They're monitoring all internal traffic. They're watching everyone. She leaned closer. They fired the entire night shift server maintenance team last month. Said it was for redundancy. But these were guys who had been here for a decade. They knew the system's history. It was a small detail, but to Elias, it was a flare in the darkness. They weren't just covering their tracks. They were erasing the past. They were getting rid of anyone who might have the institutional knowledge to see the flaws in their fabricated story. Armed with this new knowledge, Elias turned his attention back to the inconsequential data logs. He wasn't just looking for the fraud he had seen before. He was now looking for the digital tools Sterling and Vance had used to frame him. He began searching for the fingerprints of the new data integrity system, the one Lena had mentioned. He found it late on a Thursday night, a single, elegant piece of code hidden deep within the server's operating system. On the surface, it was a security protocol. But underneath, it was a master key. A piece of ghost code that allowed a user with the highest level clearance to not just access, but to rewrite the system's core logs. It could alter timestamps, fabricate user credentials, and create a perfect, untraceable digital illusion. It was the gun they had used to kill his career. And at the bottom of the code, in the developer's notes, was a single, arrogant signature, J.V. Julian Vance. The head of security had built his own secret weapon. Elias now had the how, but he still needed the what. He needed to find the fraud itself. He knew from Lena that the night shift team had been fired. That meant that for a few hours every night, the physical servers had less oversight. He began to cross-reference the server access logs from that time window with the financial transaction records. For days, he found nothing. The numbers were clean, the transactions perfect. But he was looking in the wrong place. He was looking at what was there, not at what wasn't. On a hunch, he pulled up the logs for the company's automated data backup system. And there it was. Every night, at precisely 3 a.m., the automated backup system would be momentarily disabled for a period of exactly 90 seconds. During that 90-second window, a series of massive data transfers were being made to an external, untraceable IP address. It was a massive, ongoing data heist. Sterling and Vance weren't just stealing money. They were stealing the company's most valuable asset, its proprietary market analysis algorithms, the very technology that made Etheria the dominant force in the industry. And they were using the 90-second blind spot in the backup system to do it, knowing that once the system came back online, there would be no record of the transfer ever having happened. They were stealing the company's soul and then erasing the memory of the crime. The data breach he had been framed for was not the real crime. It was the cover-up, a noisy, public distraction designed to hide the real, silent, and far more devastating theft. Elias sat back in his chair, the full, breathtaking scope of the conspiracy laid bare before him. Sterling and Vance weren't just embezzlers. They were planning a corporate execution. They were stealing the company's core technology, likely to sell to a competitor or to start their own rival firm. And they were going to leave Etheria an empty, worthless shell. And Catherine Reed, the grieving widow, the new CEO, was about to preside over the complete and utter destruction of her late husband's legacy. He knew he couldn't just walk into her office with this. Sterling and Vance controlled the security systems. They would see him coming. They would erase the evidence, and they would erase him. He had one chance, one shot to bring down the entire conspiracy, and it would have to be perfect. The knowledge of the conspiracy was a cold, hard weight in Elias's chest. He was no longer just a disgraced analyst trying to clear his name. He was the sole guardian of a truth that could either save or destroy Etheria Analytics. Sterling and Vance were not just thieves. They were corporate assassins, methodically bleeding the company dry before leaving it for dead. And he knew, with a chilling certainty, that they would not hesitate to eliminate anyone who got in their way. He couldn't go to Catherine directly. Her office, her email, her phone. He had to assume they were all being monitored by Vance's sophisticated security systems. A direct approach would be a death sentence, both for his investigation and possibly for himself. He needed a different path, a way to deliver the truth that was as elegant and untraceable as the crime itself. He needed to build a ghost of his own. He spent the next 2 days in his sub-basement office, a man possessed. He didn't sleep. He barely ate. He was back in the world he had left behind, the world of high-stakes, asymmetrical warfare, where information was the only weapon that mattered. He began to build his case, not as a corporate analyst, but as the master cryptographer he had once been. His first step was to create a secure, hidden space within Etheria's own servers. Using his knowledge of the system's archaic, forgotten subprotocols, the digital equivalent of the service tunnels he had once used in another life, he built a small, encrypted data vault. A digital dead drop, completely invisible to Vance's modern security sweeps. Into this vault, he began to move the evidence, piece by piece. The rewritten server logs, the ghost code signed by JV, and the damning records of the 3 a.m. data heists. But he knew this digital evidence, however compelling, was not enough. Vance and Sterling were masters of denial. They would dismiss it as a fabrication, another layer of his own supposed frame job. He needed something more. He needed to show Catherine not just the crime, but the criminals. His plan was audacious, dangerous, and hinged on a single, human element. Lena, the young, nervous IT technician. He knew she was terrified, but he also knew she was a woman of conscience. He approached her not in the sterile, monitored environment of the office, but in the neutral ground of a nearby coffee shop. "I know what's happening, Lena," he said, his voice low and calm. "I know what Sterling and Vance are doing, and I know you've seen things you can't explain. I'm not asking you to be a whistleblower. I'm asking you to help me turn on a light in a very dark room." He explained his plan. He had discovered that the final piece of the stolen algorithm was scheduled to be transferred in 2 days during the company's annual shareholder presentation. It was the perfect cover. While the entire company, including Catherine Reed, was distracted by the presentation, Sterling and Vance would execute the final, devastating theft. "They will be in Vance's office during the presentation," Elias explained. "They will have to manually authorize the final transfer from his secure terminal. That's their protocol. I need you to do one thing. 15 minutes before the presentation, I need you to trigger a routine diagnostic on the security camera feed for the executive wing. A diagnostic that will cause the live feed to loop the previous 60 seconds of footage for exactly 5 minutes." It was a small, almost undetectable system glitch, the kind that happened all the time. But it would give him a 5-minute blind spot. 5 minutes to get into Vance's office, plant a device, and get out, all while the security feed showed an empty, peaceful hallway. Lena was terrified, but she saw the truth and the desperate hope in Elias's eyes. She agreed. The day of the shareholder presentation was a blur of corporate pageantry. The main auditorium was filled with wealthy investors and slick financial reporters. Catherine Reed was on stage, delivering a polished, confident speech about the future of Ethereum, completely unaware that the 2 men sitting in the front row, her most trusted executives, were in the process of bankrupting her company. At exactly 10:45 a.m., as Catherine was in the middle of her presentation, Lena, from her small IT cubicle, triggered the diagnostic. In the basement, Elias watched on his monitor as the live security feed for the executive wing froze, now playing a silent, 60-second loop of an empty hallway. He had 5 minutes. He moved with a speed and an efficiency that belied his quiet demeanor. He used a cloned keycard he had created to access the executive floor. He slipped into Julian Vance's office, a space of cold glass and expensive leather. It was the office that should have been his. With practiced, precise movements, he placed a tiny, custom-built device under the desk, a wireless transmitter that would capture every keystroke and every sound in the room. He was out of the office and back in the basement in 4 minutes and 30 seconds. At 11 a.m., as Catherine was wrapping up her speech, he watched his monitor. Sterling and Vance entered Vance's office, their faces smug and triumphant. He heard their voices through the audio feed from his device. "She has no idea," Sterling said, a cruel, mocking laugh in his voice. "She's up there selling the future, and we're in here stealing it." Elias began a screen recording, capturing everything. He heard them authorize the final data transfer. He heard them discuss their plans to short the company's stock the next morning, a move that would make them billions as the company they had just gutted collapsed. He heard them toast their success with Vance's expensive single malt scotch. He now had it all. The digital evidence, the audio confession, the entire, ugly, irrefutable truth. He saved the recording to his secure, hidden data vault. Then, he composed a simple, anonymous email. The recipient was Catherine Reed. The subject line was a single word, truth. The body of the email contained only a cryptic string of characters, a URL, and a complex access key. It was a key that would lead her to his hidden vault, to the evidence that would either save her company or destroy her completely. He hit send. Catherine Reed was in her private office, a quiet sanctuary on the 40th floor, when the anonymous email arrived. She was still riding the wave of adrenaline from the successful shareholder presentation, a hollow victory given the dark cloud of suspicion that now hung over her company. She saw the subject line, truth, and her heart skipped a beat. With trembling hands, she clicked it open. The cryptic string of characters meant nothing to her, but she knew, with an instinct she couldn't explain, that this was it. This was the ghost's final move. She forwarded the email to her personal IT specialist, a young woman she trusted implicitly, with a simple, one-line instruction. Trace this. Open it. Tell me what you find. An hour later, her specialist called, her voice a hushed, terrified whisper. Catherine, she said, you need to see this. But not in your office. Not on the company network. Meet me at the secure off-site server. And come alone. In a cold, anonymous data center miles from the gleaming Etheria Tower, Catherine Reed watched as the truth unfolded on a secure monitor. She saw the evidence Elias had compiled, the ghost code, the rewritten logs, the records of the 3 a.m. data heists. And then, she watched the video recording from Vance's office. She heard the smug, triumphant voices of her two most trusted executives as they discussed her own ruin. She heard them toast to the destruction of her late husband's legacy. She watched it all in a profound, heavy silence. The betrayal was so absolute, so complete, that it felt less like a crime and more like a law of nature. She had been living in a beautiful, well-appointed house, completely unaware that the foundations were rotten to the core. When the video ended, she stood in the cold, humming silence of the server room for a long time. The brilliant, powerful CEO was gone, replaced by a woman who had been utterly and completely fooled. But beneath the shame and the fury, a new feeling was taking root, a cold, hard, diamond-like resolve. They had not just betrayed her company. They had used her grief as a weapon against her. They had mistaken her trust for weakness. And they had underestimated the quiet, broken man she had brought back into her company. They were about to learn that they had made a fatal mistake. She did not call the police. She did not call the board. She knew that Sterling and Vance controlled too many of the pieces. A direct, public accusation would descend into a messy, protracted legal battle where they could use their power and influence to bury the truth. She needed to end it, not with a battle, but with an execution. The next morning, she called an emergency, unscheduled meeting of the executive board. She requested the presence of every board member, the general counsel, and two specific executives, Marcus Sterling and Julian Vance. The meeting was to be held in the main boardroom, a place of ultimate power and authority. Sterling and Vance arrived together, their faces a mask of calm, professional concern. They had no idea what was coming. Catherine Reed began the meeting not with an accusation, but with a presentation. "Good morning, gentlemen," she said, her voice a quiet, chilling calm. "For the past 6 months, our company has been the victim of a sophisticated and devastating data heist. Today, thanks to the work of a brilliant consultant, we have finally identified the source." She clicked a button on her remote. The massive screen at the end of the boardroom flickered to life. But it did not show a spreadsheet or a data plot. It showed the video from Vance's office. The room watched in stunned silence as their own COO and head of security were caught, in their own voices, confessing to the systematic destruction of the company. The color drained from Sterling's and Vance's faces. They were trapped, exposed, executed in front of the very people they had sought to impress and betray. When the video ended, Catherine looked at the two men, her eyes not with fury, but with a cold, quiet pity. "The authorities are waiting for you downstairs," she said. "Your careers at this company are over, and I will personally see to it that you are both prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for the guilty, and transformative for the innocent. The story of the ghost of Etheria, the disgraced analyst who had come back to save the company that had destroyed him, became a legend in the tech world. In the aftermath, Catherine Reed cleaned house. The entire executive team that had been complicit in Sterling's and Vance's reign was fired. The board was restructured. And in the most stunning move of all, she made an announcement that sent shockwaves through the industry. "Etheria Analytics is built on the principle of seeing the truth in the data," she said at a press conference, her voice ringing with a new, hard-won authority. "But for years, we have been blind to the most important truths of all: integrity, loyalty, and courage. That is why, today, I am announcing the appointment of our new Chief Operating Officer, a man who has taught me the true meaning of all those words. Please welcome Mr. Elias Thorne." Elias, in a new, well-tailored suit that he had bought himself, stepped up to the podium. He did not look like a man who had sought power, but like a man who was quietly, confidently accepting a responsibility he had earned. He did not speak of revenge. He spoke of rebuilding. He laid out a new vision for Etheria, one built not on secrets and control, but on transparency and a renewed commitment to ethical practice. He announced the creation of a new, independent data ethics board and a foundation, funded by the recovered stolen money, to support and protect whistleblowers in the tech industry. His journey was complete. He had been a star, then a ghost, then a quiet, unassuming man on a corner. He had lost everything, but in saving the life of a small child, he had found a way to reclaim not just his career, but his soul. Months later, Catherine and Elias stood together on the observation deck of the Etheria Tower, looking out at the city. The company was stronger, more profitable, and more respected than ever before. "Are you happy, Elias?" Catherine asked, a quiet, genuine smile on her face. Elias thought for a moment. He thought of his quiet, empty apartment, and of the new, vibrant life he was building. "I'm not the man I was before," he said. "And for that, I am grateful. I have a purpose again." "So do I," Catherine said, looking at him, their relationship having transformed from one of employer and employee to one of deep, mutual respect and partnership. They stood in comfortable silence, two people who had been brought together by a crisis, who had walked through the fire of betrayal, and who had emerged on the other side, not just as survivors, but as architects of a better, more truthful future. They had both learned the same profound lesson, that sometimes the greatest act of courage is not just saving a life, but having the wisdom to let your own life be saved. How many of us have been framed by a story someone else has written for us? And what might happen if we found the courage to pick up the pen and write our own ending? If this story of justice and second chances moved you, please like, subscribe, and share. You never know whose true story is waiting to be told.